As above, so below, as within, as without. Welcome to Wheel of Ezekiel Astrology Podcast, Episode 22, Annual Profections, an Ancient Timing Technique. I am your host, Ezekiel David La Rosa. What I am going to be presenting now is a very valuable and incredibly accurate technique I have gained profound insights from in my own experience working with it. Annual Profections is a technique developed during the Hellenistic period in Alexandria, Egypt. Curiously, no official name for the technique has been found from any of the translations of texts where it was discovered from. It is the Western equivalent of the dasha system in the Vedic tradition. It can simply be referred to as annual profections or determining the Lord for the year. The basic premise underlying this technique is that there are certain dormant potentials indicated in an individual's natal template, of which certain houses and planets become activated during certain years of a native's life. Not all placements in a template are active at all times, but through the application of this method that I will be showing you now, one can look into one's past to make better sense of events, into one's present to know what one is currently working with, and into one's future to anticipate what is becoming active, and thus be better prepared. So, to calculate which house is perfecting in a given year, and which planet is the lord of that year, one begins from the ascendant, which is always in the first house, and counts counterclockwise, moving towards the second house, then the third house, and so forth, with each year of life, corresponding to each house progressively. So, for example, from the moment one is born up until one's first solar return, a native will be in their first house perfection. This is the house of birth, of body, health, and of self. Upon turning 1 year old, a native then passes into a second house perfection year, the house of support, values, and material resources available to the native. Then, upon turning 2 years old, a native would then pass into a third house perfection year, the house of environment, siblings, communication, learning, and skills. This same process will repeat on each solar return until a native turns 12 years of age, and once again enter a first house perfection year, beginning a new cycle and initiation into a new phase upon the wheel of life, adolescence. So here on the screen, as you can observe, I have the wheel placed up until age 71, perhaps an average lifespan for our time. But anyway, one could expand it infinitely, potentially, but for our purposes, this will be sufficient to see what I said. From the moment one is born, they're here, right here, just months, right, or days, up until a year. In the first house, perfection year, corresponding with the ascendant. Upon turning 1, you pass into a second house perfection year. Then upon turning 2, you pass into a third house perfection year. Upon turning 3, 4, 5, and so forth. You can see all around the wheel. 11 is a 12th house perfection year, and then 12 is once again a first house perfection year, as I just explained. So that's a good way to illustrate that. And then one will continue around throughout their teens. And then you can see 24, it becomes the initiation of the third cycle into adulthood, one could say. So the cycle will repeat multiple times throughout a native's life, each year activating a given house. Also a lord of the year, as well as natal placements in that house, which is adding to the interpretation of the themes that will be relevant for that given year. The planet ruling the house becoming the active lord of the year. So I will explain this more in depth here as we move along with the presentation. In order to apply this technique most efficiently, though, one must use the whole sign house system, which assigns the 30 degrees of a whole sign to a house with no overlap. It's just the simplest way to do it, and really the only accurate way to do it, assigning 30 degrees to a house for a whole sign. And then most definitely as well, using the 7 traditional rulerships of the traditional planets, which is the sun for Leo, the moon, Cancer, Mercury to Gemini and Virgo, Venus to Taurus and Libra, Mars to Aries and Scorpio, Jupiter to Sagittarius and Pisces, and Saturn to Capricorn and Aquarius. Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto have no rule in this technique, given how slow their cycles are and their predominant significations, applying more to the collective rather than individuals. So we only use the 7 traditional planets and rulerships for this technique, which goes along with the Hellenistic tradition. Planets will work more favorably or in a more challenging way depending on the sect of the chart. So one must first determine if a chart is of the diurnal or nocturnal sect. This is easily determined by observing whether the sun is above the ascendant-descendant axis, which is the horizon line, as you can see right here, between the ascendant and the 7th house, the horizon line. The sun above the horizon line is indicating a diurnal sect chart, and the sun below the ascendant line is indicating a nocturnal sect. Pretty straightforward. So the planets of the day sect, because sect is pretty much just 2 teams of planets, were separated and assigned to either the day or the night, as I'm explaining. So the day team, or the diurnal sect, the light is the sun. The light of sect of the day is the sun, and then we have Jupiter as the greater benefic and Saturn as the lesser malefic. The planets of the night sect are the moon, the light of sect, Venus, the greater benefic, and Mars, the lesser malefic. And conversely, in a night chart, Saturn becomes the most challenging planet and Jupiter less benefic. The same applies for Mars in a day chart, becoming the most challenging planet, and Venus as well, becoming a less benefic planet. Mercury is neutral in both diurnal and nocturnal charts. So depending on whether a chart is of the diurnal or nocturnal sect will determine how well a given planet is dignified in a given chart. So a few things to consider for interpreting the conditions of the Lord of the Year. Which again, the Lord of the Year is the planet that rules the sign of the house that is perfecting. So if it's, let's say, a 2nd house perfection year in Sagittarius, then Jupiter would be the Lord of the Year. Or, if it's any of the houses, let's say it's the 1st house and it's Virgo as the perfecting sign, then Mercury would be the perfecting, the Lord of the Year of the 1st house perfection year. It's all going to depend on just how the signs and houses line up in a given chart. So, okay, that's already that's already a pretty basic thing that would have to be established beforehand. But once a chart is cast, it's pretty simple to determine that. So basically, the next thing one does after determining the sect of the chart is take a look at the following conditions. Is the planet benefic or malefic? Right, the benefic planets are Jupiter or Venus, and generally the sun is considered benefic as well as the moon. And then the malefics are Saturn and Mars. Mercury is neutral. Is the planet of sect in favor or contrary? Right? Is it of the sect or of the contrary sect? It's going to dignify it or make it less dignified. Is it in a sign of rulership or exaltation? So just look up the signs of exaltation or the rulerships if you're not familiar with those, but I imagine that most of you listening are familiar with the basics of astrology. So, right, you look at the exaltation or rulership of the sign of the planet, if it happens to be in a sign of rulership or exaltation, right? Or is it in fall or detriment, which then, of course, would be a negative and weakening signification of the planet. Is it in a mutual reception? That's when two planets are in each other's signs. So let's say with Mars and Venus, if in a chart, Venus is in Aries, and then Mars is in Libra, let's say, to give an example, that would be considered a mutual reception because Venus is in Mars' sign and Mars is in Venus' sign. Pretty straightforward there. All right. Then also, is it located in a positive house or a challenging house? Which the positive houses are the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 7th, 9th, 10th, and 11th. And then the challenging houses, the positive houses are also always making an aspect to the ascendant, and that's essentially why they're considered positive houses. And then the challenging houses are not making aspects to the ascendant, and that would be the 2nd, 6th, 8th, and 12th houses. Are there aspects from the benefics, or is the reception with malefics? Two other things to look at. Are there any mitigating conditions, such as reception or a positive aspect? Anything that would be mitigating. Is it bona fide or maltreated? Which again is another formula for determining if a planet is being affected positively or negatively. And then, yeah, that's pretty much the checklist right there of the basic things you look at to determine the condition. So just like write out a checklist, maybe tally up the positive versus the negative, and then make an evaluation based off that to determine the dignity of the planet. So, okay, I think the next best thing is just to get into some example charts so as that one can see how it actually works. Right. So these examples, by the way, are from Chris Brennan's book, Hellenistic Astrology, The Study of Fate and Fortune, which is a very useful manual I recommend for studying Hellenistic astrology. And so, yeah. The first chart I want to look at, I'm actually going to share my screen here. Here we go. This is the chart of Lisa Marie Presley, the daughter of iconic American singer Elvis Presley. As one can see, she has natal Jupiter here in the 2nd house in a diurnal chart, right? With the sun here in the 7th house, just above the horizon. So she was born just before sunset, but that's still considered a diurnal chart. And the 2nd house, the sign is Virgo, which then makes the Lord of the Year Mercury, which is right here at 0 degrees in Pisces in the 8th house. which is the house of other people's money and inheritance. So the story goes, according to her father, Elvis Presley's will, when she turned 25, she was to inherit his entire estate, which is estimated to be worth around $100 million, believe it or not. So 25 is a second house perfection year. So when she turned 25, she entered this perfection year with a Jupiter, a natal Jupiter that is in mutual reception with the Lord of the year, here indicating the expansion of her wealth on a massive scale in that particular year of her life. Jupiter in the second house in a general interpretation would signify good things related to money matters, support from family, and things related to material possessions. But what makes her case so exceptional is not only Jupiter being the most benefic planet in the natal chart, but also in mutual reception with the Lord of the year, Mercury, which is in the 8th house of inheritance. So I hope that was clear to follow. She entered the second house perfection year. The Lord of the year is Mercury, which is in the 8th house of inheritance and other people's money. And then also what was really magnifying this and making it exceptionally powerful and big, as Jupiter does, is having Jupiter in mutual reception with the Lord of the year, because Jupiter rules Pisces and Mercury rules Virgo, as I just explained, mutual reception. So that's a very bonifying condition, you could say, that definitely accentuates and intensifies, or in this case, makes it extra positive. Because not anybody, just an average person entering a second house perfection year isn't necessarily going to receive such a generous inheritance. Money may be really good that year, in a general sense, or the topics of money might come up. But again, what I was trying to emphasize here is what makes her case so exceptional is the Jupiter-Mercury reception. So anyway, moving on to the next chart here. This is the chart of Robert F. Kennedy, the brother of former United States President John F. Kennedy. So he turned 38, Robert Kennedy, whose chart we're talking about here, turned 38 on November 20th of 1963, entering a third house perfection year. The third house, among other topics, is the house of siblings. As you can see, it's right here. It's Cancer is the Lord of the year. So that makes the moon the Lord of the year. So next we look at the moon. The moon is over here in the 9th house in Capricorn, a fallen moon. The moon in the 9th house, right, is conjunct to the south node, which is K2, right here, 28 degrees exactly. K2 indicates decrease, generally speaking. It can be loss. It's bringing things down is one way of understanding it. But more striking, and what really is what makes this a story here is the moon is applying to an out of sign square with Mars in the 7th house of other people in a diurnal chart, making Mars the most challenging planet in the chart. So here you can see Mars in Scorpio. Though it's in its own sign, Mars is very strong here. And as I said, it's an out of sign square. It was going to perfect as soon as the moon entered Aquarius. It would be within range. Once it reached 4 degrees Aquarius, it would go exact. But this is a not so obvious case. You have to look and anticipate where the moon was headed. Even though it hadn't crossed the sign boundary, it was already engaged in this hard aspect to Mars. So, and then, like I said, Mars is the most challenging planet here in this chart. So as history records it, 2 days later, his brother is assassinated. Uh, this event is indicating, uh, well, with Mars being the ruler of violence in this applying square to the third house of, which rules the third house of siblings, that this manifestation of the death of the sibling was going to occur, if that makes sense. So you look at the house perfection, it's Cancer, the ruler is the moon. You look at the condition of the moon, the ruler, it's not good because it's with the south node K2 and it's in a square to Mars, which generally indicates negative things, cutting, severing, weapons, accidents, and of course death. And so there you go, you plug that right in here as a signification, and history speaks for itself. But now what is doubly striking and reaffirming of the accuracy of this technique is the following example. If you're still skeptical of that, check this out. So this is the natal chart of Ted Kennedy, who is another brother of John F. Kennedy. He was 31 when his brother was assassinated, which is a 8th house perfection year. As one can see, the 8th house here is Leo, making the sun the lord of the year. So then you can see the sun here in the 3rd house of siblings, which is indicating the death of a sibling, being the sun ruling the 8th house of death, being the lord of a given year, will also have dominion over wherever it is natally placed. And in this case, it's the 3rd house of siblings. So from these two examples, one can see the incredible accuracy of this technique in two different people's lives about the same event. So astrology works. It has many different ways of indicating the same event, and here you go. Across two different charts, it's speaking to the exact same thing. I didn't find I didn't find any more, but I would be curious to see any of the other Kennedy family members having the signification in their chart. There are already 2 charts pointing this out, is pretty remarkable in itself. But yeah, there you go. That's how that technique works for that. Let's see the next example. We have one more example just to really solidify how this works here. Okay, so this is the chart of George Lucas, the director of the iconic sci-fi saga Star Wars. When he was 18, which is a 7th house perfection year, he was in a really bad car accident. So if we look here, we see that Mars is the ruler of Scorpio, the 7th house. And well, here's the thing with this. A very curious alignment took place. We can see here that Mars, well, I guess you can't see it in here, but that day, just to take my word for it, Mars was transiting his 1st house and actually exactly conjunct his natal Venus at 11 degrees of Taurus. And simultaneously, transiting Venus was exactly conjunct his natal Mars here at 25 degrees of Cancer. So one can read several things from this. First, natal Mars is the lord of the year in the 3rd house in a nocturnal chart, as well as transiting Mars in the 1st house, are both indicators of a car accident, though less malefic. Right, so 3rd house represents transportation, vehicles, all that stuff, and Mars is natally placed there. And as well as because Mars, whether we're looking at Mars transiting or natally when we're looking at the Lord of a year, but both are going to apply. You definitely pay attention to both. Mars conjunct, well, even if it wasn't conjunct natal Venus, but just even transiting his first house, the first house is the house of body. So obviously it's showing Mars afflicting the native's body physically. Um, so that's the Mars piece. And then the Venus piece, because it's so remarkable that they had this flip thing, this exchange, this mutual reception here. Venus, both transiting and natal, is acting as a mitigating factor here, which is the saving grace in this event, being the most benefic planet in a nocturnal chart. So essentially Venus is what kind of softened this, because even though he was thrown out of the vehicle, he survived the accident, and then, well, of course, went on to make Star Wars. But so here you can see kind of how both things play out. You know, from a really bad event, you can also see other factors aside from the Lord of the Year coming to intervene and mitigate and essentially, you know, soften what could be potentially a fatal situation. You know, and I have plenty examples like that, you know, even in my own life, which I'm not going to share, of, you know, mitigating factors preventing a situation from escalating to proportions that, you know, probably could have been fatal. But there you go. Now you can see a little bit more of a nuance of all of this. First example was pretty extreme in terms of inheritance, you know, an extremely positive situation. Then with the Kennedys, we can see how a really terrible malefic situation can manifest in two different charts in two completely different ways, speaking about the same moment of time. And then here we can see kind of bittersweet situation. So yeah, that's that. All right, putting the wheel back on. It might be helpful to memorize a couple of these numbers or ages with different houses. So it's pretty easy with starting. If you can think of, let's see, like, well, obviously the beginning is 0, you know, until you turn 1 year old. But then you can think of the next cycle, because it's 12 years. You know, once you turn 12, you're back in a first house perfection year. Then 18 always corresponds to the 7th. 21 to the 10th house. 27, the 4th house. Those are some maybe particularly ages that maybe stand out. Just, you know, think of the 27 club. People talk about that a lot. That's the 4th house perfection year. I mean, how it played out in each of those people's lives, you know, it's interesting to look into. But anyway, all that to say, just it's fascinating to meditate upon this, and you know, you can get a lot of information about your life by looking back. But anyway, carry on with what I want to go into next is mention some of the general themes associated with each house perfection year. Granted, there is a lot of nuance depending on which sign occupies which house, which will determine which planet rules which house, and hence will be activated as Lord of a particular year. It is obviously going to be very different for each native. Everybody's chart's so different, so of course, also stelliums, which is 3 or more planets in a house, can add weight and additional significance or significations, as well as aspects from other planets to the Lord of the Year, as well as a house perfection, or the house that's being perfected. So always pay special attention to the condition of the Lord of the Year. That's always going to be the most important planet of that year. So for first house perfection years, generally they have to do with one's perception of self, worldview, body, appearance, visibility, health, vitality, and potentially a returning to oneself, so to speak. So it's about maybe forging a new identity, taking on a new identity, perhaps. You know, it's all about the self. So look back at well, age 12 certainly is, because you're coming into adolescence, and you know, identity usually is a pretty important theme around that time. Age 24 is another one. In my experience, I'd say that's definitely true. 36, 48, 60. Those are the main ones. 72 would be the next one if we were to extend this and start a new cycle. But anyway, all those. For second house perfection years, they're generally having to do with one's sense of support and financial conditions, for better or for worse. It can be a year where one's values come into question, what one values, be it material or ethical, food, material possessions, and all things that support the body and give one a sense of security are relevant themes as well. So for the second house, it's age of 1, 13, 25, 37, 49, and 61. Third house perfection years generally have to do with one's environment, neighborhood, siblings, cousins, peers, also transportation, short trips, or commutes, skills, competition, and education. So for third house perfection, corresponds to age 2, 14, 26, 38, 50, and 62. Fourth house perfection years generally have to do with one's home, private life, family, ancestry, property, and the innermost parts of oneself. It can be a very internally active year, perhaps more so than externally, depending on all the other factors. It is also the house associated with parents, especially the mother. So ages 3, 15, 27, 39, 51, and 63 all correspond to fourth house perfection years. Fifth house perfection years generally have to do with creativity, the arts, self-expression, enjoyment, games, sports, music, romance, procreation, including sex, of course, children, and sometimes intellectual matters. And so it's just ages 4, 16, 28, 40, 52, and 64 all correspond to fifth house perfection years. Sixth house generally have to do with one's day-to-day routine, with work, co-workers, and employees. In ancient times, still relevant today with slaves. Also, topics related to health or illness, diet, exercise, also injuries and enemies, which, aside from indicating people who do not have one's best interest, are also just competing for the same things one is. The sixth house is particularly associated with tedious work one does that one does not enjoy. So chores, day-to-day monotonous tasks, mundane aspects of life. And then also with pets. And so for the sixth house, ages 5, 17, 29, 41, 53, and 67 all correspond to sixth house perfection years. Seventh house perfection years generally have to do with other people, one-on-one relationships, partnerships of any kind, could be marriage or business, with trade, commerce, courts, and legal matters, as well as events that have to do more with other people in one's life, because it's the house of others. So ages 6, 18, 30, 42, 54, and 66 all correspond to seventh house perfection years. Eighth house perfection years have to do with loss, endings, death, life force, taxes, debts, either owed or collected, as well as inheritance. It indicates how one benefits from things that belong to others. It is the house that rules occult things, so secrets, esoteric matters, as well as psychology of self and other people, perhaps. So ages 7, 19, 31, 43, 55, and 67 all correspond to eighth house perfection years. Ninth house perfection years generally have to do with higher education, long distance travel, foreign people or places, publishing, broadcasting, beliefs, faith, morals, philosophy, and teachers. It is also a house associated with good deeds. So ages 8, 20, 32, 44, 56, and 68 all correspond with 9th house perfection years. 10th house perfection years generally have to do with one's public life, social status, reputation, legacy, career, power, and influence. It is the house associated with father, generally speaking. So ages 9, 21, 33, 45, 57, and 69 correspond to 10th house perfection years. 11th house perfection years generally have to do with friends, allies, groups, or communities one belongs to. It is associated with good fortune, generally, not always, right? Indicating the ways one benefits from society. It can be one indicator of fame, as it has to do with one's audience. It indicates the networks one belongs to, as well as technology, being a beneficial thing society offers, as well as one's connections. So ages 10, 22, 34, 46, 58, and 70 all correspond to 11th house perfection years. 12th house perfection years generally have to do with hidden things, removed places of isolation, themes around one's mental health, psychology, and subconscious matters. Dreams, bad habits, addictions, things one is likely not aware of, such as hidden enemies, especially the self-destructive aspects of self. It is the house of spiritual matters, healing, and transcendence into other realms, as it is said to be a place between worlds. So ages 11, 23, 35, 47, 59, and 71 all correspond to 12th house perfection years. It is to note as well that Cancer and Leo perfections are likely to be more potent years with eclipses, due to the luminaries being the lords of those perfection years, especially if the eclipses take place in Cancer or Leo. These signify either major endings or major beginnings, depending on which node the eclipse is happening under. The North Node Rahu is about increase and beginnings, whereas the South Node Ketu is about decrease and endings. There's always going to be mitigating factors. So again, what I just said right here was very, very general significations associated with each of the houses in context to perfection years. I showed the example so you can see how oftentimes there can be overlap with other houses, or significations can be imported. So let me know in the comments how this resonated. There are plenty more example charts I could have shown to compile the evidence of the effectiveness of this technique. And I would be interested in hearing any stories anyone wishes to share about specific house perfections. Always keep in mind the nuances involved, as significations from one house can be imported into another house via house ruler being in a separate house than the one being perfected. Also, the planetary transits that are in constant motion are a factor to take into consideration, especially the Lord of the Year. So, for example, if one were in a Cancer perfection year, one would pay special attention to the moon and the lunation cycle that year, especially when the moon was in Cancer or making aspects to any planets in Cancer, just as an example. But, you just will track whatever planet is the Lord of the year, whatever it's doing, both natally, aspects to the natal Lord of the Year, or the Lord of the Year transiting other planets, as we saw in the Lucas example. I recommend the mental exercise of looking at the annual Profections wheel and review one's life from as far back as one can remember. Think back on the themes of major events that took place for each year of life. Find the Lord of the Year and look at where it is placed in your natal chart. This could take some time, but I assure you it's a very well worth exercise that will generate some insights. You will make certain connections in your life in context to the astrology, which again is just an indicator that helps maybe explain certain things that have happened to you in the past that you don't understand, or things happening right now that maybe you're struggling to understand. And as I said at the beginning, it's also a very useful tool to anticipate what's coming. So look at your next house perfection year that's coming in, and yeah, it's a great tool to use for many different purposes. Um, I offer readings, and I can help calculate and interpret this for you if you would like. Um, I know this can be confusing to beginners that perhaps aren't very familiar with a lot of the techniques of astrology. So if you're interested in scheduling a session with me, just send me an email to wheelofezekielastrology@hotmail.com. And with that, I want to thank you for listening to this episode of Wheel of Ezekiel Astrology Podcast. Until next time, as above, so below, as within, as without.